So you figured out you want to do weaving, you've bought your looms, you need some basic supplies obviously to go with those looms so you can finally get started enjoying this hobby. What is it that you need? Okay, fairly obvious. You need some sort of fiber, whether it be, for example, yarn. This is just acrylic yarn that I've got. Sometimes you'll buy different types of threads. So this is like 8/4 cotton. You'll notice that various threads have different numbers. Okay, the higher the number, oddly enough, the thinner the actual thread happens to be. So if I have, for example, and then you have it depending on whether you're in America or in Canada, the numbers may be reversed. It might be 2/8 or 8/2. Okay, so in this case here, this is basically 4/8 cotton. All right. So what it's saying is that this cotton thread, and what I tend to do is I tend to take some painter's tape because it doesn't leave the adhesive behind, and I will mark down what it is and the color it happens to be, so that when I go back, I'm not trying to figure it out. I find a lot of times I'll put the stickers on it and it doesn't give a whole lot of information. Okay, so if I take off the painter's tape here for a second, and I were to actually take a look at this yarn right here, okay. Oh, and of course it's completely tangled here. There we go, it's twisted. There we go, okay? So basically, this yarn here, all right, is a thickness of 8, all right, which is going to be thicker than, let's say, something that was, let's say, a thickness of 14. 4 indicates, okay, and I'm not sure if you're gonna be able to see this, but 4 indicates that I have basically 4 different strands, okay, of the cotton. Now, if it was going to be 8/2 cotton, it would be the same thickness, okay, in terms of the strands would be the same thickness, but there would only be 2 of these as opposed to 4 of these, okay? Now, once you've got your fiber that you plan to use for your different projects, you're going to need shuttles, and there are different types of shuttles depending on what project you have. I might actually do a video down the road on different shuttles and what you use them for. So basically, this one here, for example, okay, is what we would call a boat shuttle. All right, it's kind of like nicely pointed ends. You want to make sure that your hand fits nicely around it. It's not too big. In there, you're going to have a bobbin. So typically, your boat shuttle will lift up, and you've got your the metal rod there that you put your bobbin through. This is basically a 4-inch bobbin if I show you one that's empty. So you get a 4-inch bobbin. There are obviously other types of boat shuttles that have longer bobbins. So let me show you that. So this one here, for example, right, is another boat shuttle. All right, it has obviously a much bigger bobbin. And this one also has wheels, okay, so that it will slide across very nicely. Now, my boat shuttle, I've never had any issues sliding across, but the width of a lot of my projects are not excessively long. This, if you have a very long project, you may want the wheels to kind of give that extra little oomph to get it to the other side, okay? You can also get boat shuttles that have double bobbins, okay? So the double bobbins is that sometimes you want to weave 2 different types of threads together. You can wind them on, and when you're winding them onto the bobbin, you can potentially wind them together, but sometimes, again, it's not perfect when it's doing that. When you have, and it can leave issues when you're going from one side to the other, it can leave little loops at the end. By having basically, let's say I want this one to be the white 8/2 cotton, let's say, and this one's a black 8/2 cotton, let's say, and again, on the other side, you're going to have holes where the thread is actually coming out. And then, so as I put it through, they're going out at they should be going out at pretty much the same rate and causing no issues that way. I have used these. I do like them. I don't use them often because I don't typically use double types of colors in my weaving at this point, but it is quite useful to have. This one here is a ski shuttle, okay? I have yet to use a ski shuttle, okay? And then you've got basically your rag shuttle, okay? And again, sometimes you can find these, like, people make, like this one looks like it was obviously made. And again, me, it's not a big deal because I want to try and do a rag rug, and so you would basically, because the rags will be thicker, you put it around here. You're going to have to unwind it manually, put it through, because it's not obviously going to unwind itself. Stick shuttles are the other type. Again, I'm not really fond of stick shuttles because, again, you are manually winding it, which is not a big deal. But as I'm putting it through, I need to manually unwind it and put it through. If you've got a very narrow kind of project, that's not really a big deal. But if you've got a longer project, it can, become, I find it a bit cumbersome to do that. This is obviously not a shuttle. It's a pickup stick, okay, which obviously can be used, rigid heddle looms, to do certain patterns, or also when you're doing a particular design and you need, you don't have enough shafts or harnesses in your loom to do this, it's more time consuming to use a pickup stick to be able to lift the thread so you can put, a different type of thread in a certain section to make a change of color, okay. Another thing that you're going to want to have is a reed hook, okay? So basically, you're looking at something like this. That's basically to grab the thread, okay? You can also have a sleigh hook, which kind of has more of like an S kind of shape to it. But I use this basically for everything, and I've never really had an issue with it, okay? Another one that you're going to need to have is, or highly suggest that you have, is a warping board. So, for example, if I'm doing a dish towel that has 400 threads of 8/2 cotton, and I want my warp to be 2 yards long, I have to cut each thread, each thread 2 yards long, and I got to do that 400 times. That makes no sense. A warping board saves you an inordinate amount of time. Now, there are things called warping mills. I've never used a warping mill myself, but basically for the same purpose. So I have made a video on how to use an actual warping board if you're interested in how to use that. But again, strongly suggested, saves a huge amount of time in terms of doing your warp. There are other things that you can buy for your loom that are not necessarily immediately required, okay? There is a sectional warp beam that I have that came with my loom, but again, most looms do not come with a sectional warp beam. I love it. I have made a video on using a sectional as part of your floor loom. It allows you to have a much longer warp because, again, there's only so many threads that can go around that warp beam before it becomes too full, right? So that sectional warp beam allows you to have a much longer warp. Another thing is a tension box and a spool rack. So spool rack basically is usually some sort of wooden rack. It's got all sorts of metal bars on it, and then you've got these larger bobbins. Now this one I didn't buy. My husband 3D printed this basically, but they go along the actual metal rods. And each of them has a thread, or you can actually use the individual cones, like the cone I showed you. You can have a whole bunch of cones, and basically you take all the threads and you warp onto 1 inch of the sectional at a time. So it is supposed to speed things up. I can't speak to that myself. I've done it manually myself. I find that that works for me at this point. A tension box, again, is usually not cheap. If you can find one secondhand, even better. And a tension box will also typically come with a counter. And so the really cool thing, actually, one moment here. Okay, so basically this is a secondhand tension box that I bought myself, okay? And so the yarn basically is winding through, okay? And I've shown you a picture on the video already. It also has, in this case, it has a counter, okay? So what it's doing basically is that you're going to be wrapping the yarn around this, and as the yarn goes through here, it's counting how many yards or meters, it depends. And of course, this one I bought secondhand, so I'm not quite sure what it is. But again, I know when I initially bought it, I took, I started from 0, I let it go to 1, and then I measured what the length was. And at that time, I remember whether it was meters or yards. Being a Canadian company, Leclerc, I'm guessing it's going to be meters, but that is something that actually can be quite useful. Even if you just buy the counter on its own, it can also be quite useful. And the reason for that is that sometimes you go, like for example, sometimes I'll go to an estate sale of a weaver that's passed, and I'll buy some sort of yarn, and I don't have any clue. It's on a spool. I have no clue how much is on there. Is there enough for me to actually use for my project? I don't know, and there's nothing worse than doing it. Like if you're a knitter, for example, and you get to the end and you're missing like this much yarn to finish off your project. I mean, there's nothing more frustrating than that. So there are different mathematical calculations you can do based on based on weight, and I can do a small video on that as well. But the other option is to put it through a counter and literally, like, you're winding it on to obviously another spool. So when these cones that I showed you here, so Maurice Broussard basically is Canadian. It's in Quebec. It's not too far. It's a few hours away from the house. And so every year or two I go and visit and I buy. They also obviously deliver. But basically in their cones they have obviously a cardboard thing that I actually will. I debated, like, what do you do with this? Do you just recycle it? I had no idea. So I thought, you know what, this is great if I want to. If I don't have enough bobbins, I can actually use this. Obviously, it's not going to go in a boat shuttle, but I can use it to wind on leftover thread that, or to transfer thread from one side, from one cone to another, for example, if I need to. So they can be useful. I would suggest hanging on to them. Every company has different types of cones that they've got as well. I think Harrisville, for example, is more of a triangular cone, and so forth. All right. Other things that you may want to start off with are like books and DVDs. I have a video on weaving resources that I found really helpful because I've only been weaving for a couple of years here. And subscriptions that I've made, like to Hand Woven, for example. Long Threads Media has a bunch of video lessons that you can learn various things. So again, your books Learn to Weave. And pattern books. So again, things that you will initially need. As time goes on, you may add stuff, but there are certain things that, at the beginning is really helpful for you to just get started. It is an initial investment to get started in weaving. It's not cheap, as any hobby when you start any hobby, but it's not an ongoing expense except for, the actual materials that you're using for projects once you've got your basic things. There are other things that you can actually buy to add, to your weaving experience, your weaving hobby, that are not always completely essential. But again, we'll investigate that in the next video. So have yourself a great day. Bye.